It's Friday morning in Switzerland, Friday afternoon in Australia, and it's time for Space Café Australia. This Space Café Australia with Annie Handmer will begin very soon. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. My name is Chiara Monter. I'm the event coordinator at SpaceWatch.Global and host of the Space Café Benelux, together with my co-host Banu Bazingi. And today I'm able to be here with you from the headquarters, so very exciting. So SpaceWatch is a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. And with Annie Handmer, we have found a great friend and a wonderful host for our outreach in Australia. I know that many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. Our recent episode is actually with Elodie Viau, the communications director at ESA, so give that a listen. It's really worth your time. We also keep our fan shop online open for you, where you can support us actively and become a space watcher. Edition 1 has cool items for you, your friends, and the ones you love. And your support is needed to keep our work alive for you. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our webpage in the events section and on our YouTube channel. And we will host our Space Café Australia live on a regular basis. And with that, my job is done, and I'd like to hand you over to your host in Sydney today. Annie, over to you.
G'day, and thank you so much for that lovely introduction. My name is Annie Handmer. I'm in my final weeks of a PhD at University of Sydney, and I am so excited to be here for Space Café Australia. So before I kick off, I'd like to give a really quick acknowledgement of country. I am currently on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation here on the east coast of Australia, and it gives me a lot of pleasure to be able to bring this to you wherever you are in the world from where I am, which is a very special place. And today we are speaking to, well, I'm speaking to, and you get to listen in, to Vienna. Vienna Tran is a great friend of mine. She's a space medicine researcher who's investigated the use of artificial gravity for the hip muscles of astronauts during a prolonged bed rest analogue. She has first-class honours from the University of Adelaide. She regularly gives public talks. She writes articles for spaceaustralia.com on space health, on the industry, and on STEM. She enjoys working with visitors in her role with the Australian Space Discovery Centre. And in 2022, she'll be working in regional South Australia as a medical doctor to further her skills in healthcare for Earth and for space. And I honestly was talking to Vienna. Vienna, I'll let you speak in a moment, I swear. But I'm really excited to be able to speak to Vienna and to catch up and have a conversation today about all things space medicine and space philosophy related. So with that, let me hand over to you finally and say welcome. Thank you for being here. And how are you going?
Hello, Annie. It's great to be here. Thank you very much to Chiara and Annie for inviting me. I'm going very well, thank you. It's a nice sunny day here in Adelaide, Australia. And I've been enjoying keeping up with the space news, which goes on and on despite the happenings of the world.
Yeah, there's been some exciting stuff happening here in Australia recently. How are things looking down in South Australia? I was hoping to be there this week for the Space Summit, but unfortunately it's not to be. But how's it all going?
It's very exciting. There is a launch happening, I believe it's today, or it's already happened, and it's by Southern Launch in collaboration with TI Space. And Southern Launch is launching its first commercial payload to space in many decades, like in terms of Australia. So it's a very exciting collaboration, and I think South Australians and Australians are very proud of Southern Launch being able to launch from home soil. And having constructed this launch complex at Whalers Way near Port Lincoln. So that is an exciting piece of space news. There's also the Australian Space Forum coming up on Wednesday, which I'll be there. Shout out in the chat if you will also be there, and I will come and say hello to you.
Fantastic. I wish I could be, but I will be online. So shout out in the chat and I'll say hi online as well. So let's get into it, V, and talk about medicine. What on earth does space have to do with medicine?
Well, the real question is, what does medicine have to do with space? And let me tell you, well, I think we are going into a new age of human exploration in space. We had a big spike in the late 1900s with the Apollo era and so on. And we expanded the envelope of human knowledge and adventure when we reached the moon as a species. And we haven't gone back since. With the Artemis program and people going back to the moon and onto Mars, we are going to push the envelope once again. And to do that, we need to keep the astronauts safe and healthy and happy in space. So this is the new frontier for space, I think. We've got the rockets, we've got the technology, we've got the science. I think the rate limiting step is, how do we keep people healthy in space? And it is going to be a huge, huge task, and we know nothing about it comparatively.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's come back to that in a second. But I think it would probably be worth asking very quickly for you to tell us a bit about your journey and how you got interested in space medicine.
So my story is a little bit idiosyncratic. I think everybody starts with looking up at the stars as a child, right? So I remember when I was 5 or 6 years old, and my dad would take me to an observatory to look at the moon up close through a telescope with the Astronomical Society of South Australia, which I blame for my interest in space today. And ever since then, I was very fascinated by the fact that there was this entire world out there that we as humans couldn't reach. And then how did I get into medicine? I guess it was a period of confusion, because as those who have been through high school know, you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what you want to do. You may have a dream, or you may have no idea, and there's no way to know. So there's quite a lot of pressure it was quite a lot of pressure for me and perhaps people who remember going through high school, choosing what to do. And really it came down to job prospects and personal development. By that I mean health had quite a secure job prospect, the way that I saw it. And I wanted to develop my interpersonal skills. And that sounds really cheesy, but I really did want to get better at speaking and communicating with people. And I wanted to help society as well. And I had a lot of adults talking in my ear and saying, well, you're going to be chasing grants all day if you choose astronomy as a career. So I'm like, okay, I'll just do medicine and see what happens. And I'm still here. After 7 years, I'm still here. But the thing that's gotten me through the second half of my degree is this discovery of space medicine, which has allowed me to combine my love and fascination of space with my love of helping people and, solving problems for humanity too. So having discovered that, I got this, I'm guessing I'm forging my own destiny in space medicine, wherever that might take me. But it's certainly not conventional, and the road less traveled is a lonely one, but it sure is fun.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. I was just thinking as you said that there'll be a lot of students in Australia at the moment preparing for their HSC exams, which have been disrupted to some extent because of COVID. And so if you, especially in New South Wales, so if you're anybody who's attending and listening in today, good luck to all of those students. If you know someone, or you know someone who knows someone, it's a really difficult time. And like, as a broader point, V, I reckon we put a lot of pressure on young people to weigh up these questions of, okay, what's going to give me a secure career path? Where am I going to get paid to do something? And then also balance that with, I want to do something decent for society. And then somewhere in the middle of all of that is the combination of the two, where you also have to find it interesting and be driven by the concept of it. And I just think there's, in a way, I remember getting this book when I was at school that was like, here are all of the possible careers. And it was literally like a telephone directory of jobs, and going through it and like with a pen and circling whatever I thought I could possibly stomach. But space medicine was not in there, and nor was whatever it is that I'm doing. So I wonder whether this question of forging your own path, you mentioned that it's been like the road less traveled is a bit of a lonely one. I wonder, can I ask you to say a bit more about that?
We're getting straight into the deep end. I like it.
Yeah.
And so the road less traveled is a lonely one because by definition, there's not many people on that path. And sometimes, like, I think we're all born on the same path, right? And philosophically, like you could say, we start to diverge and we start to go down these different paths. And you'll keep diverging like a tree. And eventually you might find yourself by yourself on the path that you've taken, at this fork in the road. You could be like, I want to do medicine, I want to do something completely like space engineering, space science, space archaeology. And then I was like, I'll go down the space medicine route because that looks interesting. Found that there was no one there until I started talking to people at conferences and online and connecting with people like you, Annie. And you find that there are lots of people on that path. It's just that you didn't see them when you started. So you just got to have the faith and keep walking along that. And eventually you do find people who maybe aren't on that exact same path, but they're on the one adjacent, or you can see them. You see them up in the air, or you can see them, in the distance somewhere, but they're with you and they're walking with you. I've always been someone who does things differently because everybody else has done it the same already. Like they say, it's probably attributed to Dr. Zeus or something, but be yourself because everyone else is taken. And I live by that because it gives me comfort and strength to know that I'm doing something that nobody else has done and answering questions, hopefully, that nobody else has asked. Because that's really how we develop as a species, and that's how we contribute to the people in the next generation.
There's also something, I think, just adding on to that, in finding the gaps between things and then filling them. Finding, if I have my booklet of possible jobs, where are the gaps between those jobs where I can see an opportunity? Because the world, like, we divide it up into categories, but there's always an other. And in many ways, I feel that the space community, especially in Australia, is a natural home for people who feel that maybe they're other. And they find their fit, they find the people, you find others who share that particular view. And of course, it's the being able to sit at the nexus between these different areas, being able to understand and speak a bit of the astronomy language and understand a bit of the technical side of things that would enable you also to bridge that gap between space and medicine and form your own path there, which, as you say, is not easy. But at the same time, it's something that has value. I think we're seeing all the time at the moment, in particular in Australia, the very important link that there is, and an active link between science and society, and between like policy and actual humans as well. That particular nexus is deeply complicated, and you don't notice that there aren't people doing that translation job until suddenly you need them, and so on. I mean, as someone working in the medical field, you'd spend a lot of your time translating concepts from scientific to practical, livable options for people all the time, and you'd also see it happening in policy and so on. Is that something also that you reflect on as being a skill that you have?
It's a skill that you can either have or you can develop, and you don't spend over 5-6 years in medical school for nothing. Like you see enough patients that you eventually you observe enough that you can develop the skill of translating science and knowledge into something practical for people. So you could say, in a way, where doctors can be a form of science communicators in a very, very strange way. And it helps people directly every day. So I think it's a very privileged position, and I want to use that privilege for something that will be lasting beyond the years that I live on this earth, and that could be something space medicine related.
For sure. So let's think about space medicine then, and what it would be like to send people into space. And I know you've done some specific research on the effects of space on human physiology. Maybe we start there. Would you be up for giving a bit of a summary of your research?
Okay, I can give a summary of my research. So as some of the people in the audience may know, our muscles atrophy in space. And the reason for this is that on Earth, we are subjected to 1G, or the force of gravity, all the time. And so our bodies evolved over millions of years to survive in that 1G. Down to our cells, we survive in 1G. We've not known anything else until about 60 years ago. And when we go to space, we're in a field of microgravity. So say in the International Space Station, or if you're traveling between the Earth and the Moon, you are in a field of gravity which is called microgravity because it's not exactly zero. There's gravity everywhere, but it rapidly diminishes the further you move away from a massive body. In microgravity, your body doesn't have to work as hard to stay upright. And that's my field of research because I was looking at the hip muscles, or the gluteal muscles, or as some people on Twitter called, the butt. So it's always a good talking point when I like to say that I study butts, but like it's a lot more complicated than that. Our hip muscles, as well as our leg muscles and even our back muscles, are anti-gravity muscles that keep us upright. So they're working all the time, even though we don't feel it on Earth. In space, they're not working. And so there's less neuromuscular input, and therefore, if you don't use it, you lose it. The muscle cells feel like they don't need to be there anymore, so they will atrophy, or they will get smaller and smaller. Over time, over months and over years, if you are traveling interplanetary, then you can lose quite a bit of muscle mass, more so towards the bottom of the body than the top of the body. And this is fine because the body is very good at adapting. This is fine until we get to another gravity well, either going back to Earth or to the Moon or to Mars. This is where our body suddenly has to readapt again to a gravity field. And when we have to do that, then it puts it as risk of fractures and mobility issues and loss of function. And being an astronaut on Mars with not much help, you do not want to lose function and mobility. It would be very bad. So that's why we need to keep muscles healthy in space. Now, my research was looking at a 60-day bed rest study, which was simulating that microgravity by putting 24 patients, paying them, of course, to lie down in bed for 60 days at a 6-degree head down tilt. It was a very laborious process for them, and I probably wouldn't like to do it myself. But some of those participants stayed in bed the whole time still, and some of those participants were wheeled on a barouche down to a room where they'd be centrifuged. They'd be centrifuged at an equivalent of 1G for 30 minutes a day to see if that centrifugation would affect the atrophy in the hip muscles. The results were that it didn't, unfortunately, but it can be really easily explained by the fact that our body it's put under 1G when we're standing, but when we're walking and when we're running, it can get under stress about up to 9G. So putting them at 1G for 30 minutes a day would not do very much. However, having said that, the study was designed for many research groups to look at many different body systems. So we couldn't specify how strong we wanted the artificial gravity. So at least we know now that that short dose of light artificial gravity would not do anything for your butt.
Which I'm sure will be of great interest to many. It's it's very important to know these things. But I mean, we make light of it. But of course, as you say, if you don't have muscles that are strong and doing what they need to do, then you're at risk of all sorts of issues. I'm really interested in what you just said then about how you designed this study and then you were just looking at one specific aspect of it, but there were many other aspects that you're also looking at. When you think about space travel in the future and the stresses that humans will be put under, what are some of the other issues that you see might come up?
Right. So we can go from head to toe, or we can go chronologically. When you launch into space, you're immediately put under stress due to acceleration of the body. And this can cause nausea. This can cause eventually fluids to rise up into the head and the chest due to the microgravity. As they're normally used to going, being down here, but you'll get more fluid up here, which will compress your brain, compress the back of the eyeball, and result eventually in space-acquired neuroocular syndrome, or SANS. We don't have a solution for that yet. Some optional solutions, contact lenses, glasses, all of these having to be manufactured in space to adapt to each individual's SANS. You can get headaches, you can get a runny nose. In fact, there are two medications that they use a lot in the space station. This is very telling. The first one is antihistamines, because they get blocked noses all the time. And the second one is a sleep medication, because they have terrible trouble sleeping. So more on that later. But you also, the shape of your heart changes because it doesn't need to work as hard to pump blood to the vital organ up here. You eventually lose blood volume because your body urinates out the fluid that it feels like it doesn't need anymore. The problem with that is your bones actually leach out calcium due to the fact that you're not using them. And when you've got calcium in the blood, they'll filter through your kidneys and leave calcium deposits, and then you get kidney stones. But wait, there's more.
Oh no. This isn't sounding good, V.
It's not, isn't it? You can see why this is a big knowledge gap and a new frontier for new space enthusiasts. Come join us. We need to solve lots of problems. Living in space, so not just the body, but the interaction of the human with the environment. Pathogens become more resistant to antibiotics in space, and they develop a wall around their cells, so they're harder to kill off, and they multiply more quickly. Viruses get reactivated in space because your body is under immense stress and your immune system is compromised. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, no, please.
Other environmental factors, obviously you've got the radiation, which you will be affected by, especially if you go beyond the Van Allen belt, which the ISS isn't. So the ISS is relatively protected, but if you go to the moon and onto Mars, you get this additional problem of cosmic and galactic radiation coming in from deep space, as well as protons and ionizing radiation coming from the sun. And that can wreak havoc on the DNA of the human body and cause reactive oxygen species, which can damage the cells. Only up to less than 20 people have been outside the Van Allen belts to go to the moon. And so we don't have enough sample size to know whether the diseases that these astronauts developed later in life was related to the radiation or not. But it will be very relevant for Mars travel. Radiation also affects other things. It affects food and it affects medications. In fact, medications expire more quickly in space, and this is likely due to the radiation that is present. So we need some people to manufacture drugs, most likely, and space-specific drugs as well, that are shielded from the radiation, because currently they actually take just normal pharmacy drugs. So we've got a very interesting interaction between not only the human, but also the other bugs on the space station, the bugs in your body, medications, food, machinery, equipment, and distance, and lots of other fun things. So space medicine, it might sound like medicine, but it is multidisciplinary. It is really, really multidisciplinary.
Yeah, I'm getting that feeling. It's like so much else in the space sector that you have to be able to bridge across so many different things. Um, and I'm just thinking, look, now I'm in New South Wales, I'm actually in Sydney, and we are coming into our 12th week, I think, of lockdown. And so, as a little experiment of living in an analog of Earth, where you have to be indoors for a lot of the time, my own experiences have led me to believe that going to space might actually be quite challenging for mental health as well. I think a lot of people have experienced that being stuck in a room or in an indoor space, not having that social contact with others, not having that physical contact with others and meeting new people and so on and so forth, has actual impacts that go beyond really basic stuff to like quite significant impacts on how you feel and how you adapt as well. And the other side of it is that after almost 12 weeks now of being in lockdown, we've had it announced that we might get, if we're very good, we might get to have a picnic at some point later in the month. And as exciting as that is, there's also a part of me that is internally panicking at the idea of actually talking to humans. So, what about the mental health aspects of space? Have we done studies into what happens to human emotions and mental states when you're not even on Earth anymore?
That's a very, very good question. I want to preface that by saying that you might feel isolated being at home, but at least you can FaceTime people. If you're on Mars and you're with the same people, the same astronaut and the same crew that entire time in that airlock, then it takes anywhere between 2 and 22 minutes for a signal to reach Earth from Mars, and then another 2 to 22 minutes to reach Mars from Earth. So if you want to FaceTime your friend back on Earth, you might be waiting a long time. So it's going to be doubly challenging.
Hey, are you saying you might leave me on red? That has to be the cruelest thing to do. No, thank you.
It would take 22 minutes for me to or actually 44, because you would have to, like, this is if the planets are the furthest away from each other relative to the solar system. There's no way to make that faster because it's the speed of light. So that would be really interesting, and I wonder if we would need artificial intelligence to keep us company somehow, just like a very advanced Siri. Because we might just get sick of talking to our crew. But in terms of mental health, so it's difficult because the astronauts that have been selected so far, who are career astronauts, have been selected out of many, many thousands for peak physical and mental condition. So you're looking at probably the fittest and the strongest and the happiest and the best team members and individuals who have been to space. And so it's not representative of the general population. But having said that, there have been records of mood disorders developing on the space station due to isolation and loneliness and stress. It's not an aesthetically nice place to be, and in terms of your schedule, it's full on. You're exercising for 2 hours a day, you're probably sleeping for 8 hours a day, and the rest of that you're doing experiments and talking to ground control and having them tell you what to do. So I wonder how much of your sense of control would be internal versus external, because you really are a monkey up there and you need to be okay with that. Team dynamics is really important. If you don't get along with one team member, that can affect everybody else. And there have been instances of possible psychosis in space. There has been a case of somebody playing with the airlock by themselves, and another astronaut noticed it and had to pull that astronaut away because it was just looking very, very dangerous. So people do things in isolation that they wouldn't otherwise do. This extends to sleep and it extends to physical health as well, which is why the other most consumed medication in space is a sleeping tablet, because it is just a horrible place to sleep. There's noise, there's light, there's people waking you up probably, and you don't have that nice feeling of a blanket as you would on Earth. So mental health, huge. We need more people looking at mental health, especially in civilians as well as career astronauts.
Yeah, okay. We have some questions in from the chat. Actually, your point around blankets is an interesting one. The psychological idea of sleeping without the weight of blankets on you. I know some people who've got really into those actual weighted blankets. If anyone's tried those out, please give your reviews in the chat, or send them through. I'd be very curious. We have a question from Malcolm, which is about large rotating space structures and whether that could alleviate the effects of microgravity on human physiology. So I guess the idea is, I think there's been a few movies which use these, including Interstellar, I think, had a rotating structure. And the idea that you create this artificial gravity that I suppose would be, more than just 30 minutes in a centrifuge, but it would be a 24/7 rotating thing, and that would create that sense of weightedness. What do you think, V? Is that going to solve our problems in terms of, well, certainly butts, I think, was a key consideration in the chat. But yes, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. Thank you, Malcolm. But yeah, what do you reckon?
I think that Malcolm is scientifically on the ball, because the larger we have our artificial gravity centrifuge arm, the slower it needs to rotate to generate the 1G, and the less gradient there is between the head and the toe. Whereas if the arm of your centrifuge is like 3 meters, then there's a higher gradient, which means that your feet, relatively speaking, they are put under a greater force compared to your head, and so you get this differential, which is not very pleasant and not very nice for the body. There's also the Coriolis effect. So in a centrifuge, you need to keep your head still, because if you turn your head, then you get, I can't quite explain it now, but it's an effect that you have when there's a force going down this way and you suddenly turn your head without, really quickly. And that is also very uncomfortable and nausea inducing. In the study that I worked on, if the centrifuge spun any greater than 1G, then participants would actually start to feel faint. They didn't actually faint, but they would feel faint. And that is an ethical question, because if you put people in a centrifuge for a long period of time, then they could start to have those effects. Interestingly, this goes back to knowledge, right? And knowledge and what we think is possible. We never thought that a long arm human centrifuge was possible. Therefore, our study only used a short arm human centrifuge of 3 meters. But Malcolm is talking about China sending up a large spacecraft, and of course SpaceX has a Starship, which is quite a wide diameter and can fit quite a big centrifuge around its circumference. And the more we are able to engineer large things and get them into space, the more we can help humans space medicine wise, because we open up possibilities for things to be done that haven't been done before, and we debunk things that we thought were impossible, and that opens up options for keeping people healthy and safe in space.
So bigger is better, potentially.
Indeed. And Malcolm, thank you for mentioning 2001: A Space Odyssey. It's my favorite movie, so thank you. It is, in my medical, unqualified medical scientific opinion, bigger is better.
We've had another sort of input here, which is talking about using circular stations and doing, at NASA, they had these ones where you can pedal to power it and it simulates gravity, and also there's a fitness element to it, which I think is a very interesting idea. We've also had a question from Phil about how much gravity is required to keep musculoskeletal fitness. So if you're living on the moon or you're living on Mars, do you need to have additional gravity in order to keep your body functioning? I suppose this is a multi-part question in a way, because on the one hand, right, is the way that human bodies are adapted to Earth to our 1G. Now, that might be what we might call natural, but natural is not necessarily better if you're trying to adapt to living the rest of your life on Mars. So, I guess there's a question of, does the body need to be, do our butts need to look the way that they look on Earth, on Mars, in order to be healthy? I suppose is the first question. Like, what does healthy actually mean when you're on Mars? And then the second question, part of that question, I guess, would be, if it does need to be the same, or it does need to be different, what do you need to do to achieve that? I don't know if you can answer this, V, because I'm not sure there is an answer, but I'd be curious to hear you have a go.
Spoiler, there isn't an answer yet. Otherwise, we probably would have already figured it out and done it. And of course, we lack data on microgravity, let alone partial gravity. Partial gravity being something like the Moon, which is 1/6 G, and Mars, which is 0.38 G. So we don't know if it's like a linear relationship of degeneration, or if it's exponential, or what have you. So we really don't know what the body is going to need or do when we go to other bodies, planetary bodies. So that's a really interesting question. It redefines what's healthy, doesn't it, Annie? Because healthy could be something on Earth, and it could be a completely different definition when you're in a different environment on Mars. So you could be atrophied on Mars, from our point of view, but they could be completely functional because they don't need to exert as much on Mars to, say, like lift up an item. There's just no need for it at all. So
Yeah.
Very, very good question.
Well, bodies do different things even on Earth, depending on what's required. Like an athlete who's competing in, say, the pole vault is going to have a very different distribution of muscle to the distribution that I have, for example. Just by a professional view of watching the Olympics has told me this. And equally, I think there is something to be said for, if you grow up doing something as a child, your body kind of adapts to it, I think, physiologically. I mean, I grew up playing hours of violin, and I think that my fingers are permanently bent in certain ways as a result, which probably wouldn't have been the case otherwise. So, like, is it possible that if we had people born off Earth in different gravitational situations, that their bodies might just end up looking quite different and functioning a little bit differently?
Yeah, that is very possible. However, there's in evolution, there's Lamarck's theory and there's Darwin's theory. And when we talk about Lamarck, we're talking about the environment will shape the next generation. It's not that quick, actually, because a child is the combination of their parents' genetics. So that child may grow up to have different adaptations and different abilities, but in the womb and, straight out of the womb, they would have exactly the same makeup as the mum and dad.
Yeah, so we'd be talking about like many, 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 many generations to have actual variation in what a human looks like or is like, right? We've had a question in the chat come through from Stephen, who wants to talk about the identical twins study. There was the one twin who went to space and one that stayed on Earth, and there was a study done there. We've also had a question about vision, and Alice wants to know whether we can all become bionic people with metal implants and skeletons to overcome bone density issues. I think I'd like to hear your thoughts on these particular technical things. And then I want to diverge a little bit and head into ethics for a while for the final bit of the discussion about like this question of, we spend this time thinking about whether we could, but we never thought about whether we should. Something about along those lines springs to mind. But yeah, let's start with those identical twins.
Yeah, so Scott and Mark Kelly did an experiment where Scott went to space for a year and Mark Kelly stayed on the ground, and they were both NASA astronauts. They've had that experience. The very interesting thing is that although Scott underwent many adaptations, once he got back down to Earth, he was able to adapt pretty quickly to what Mark had. So there were very, very minimal differences between the two after spaceflight. The only thing that they found was something DNA related. It was something like the shortening of telomeres, which are when you've got a cell, and inside the cell there's a nucleus, and the nucleus has DNA, and when they replicate, they do this, right? And so that part of it is a little bit shorter. I have no idea as to the mechanism of that. I would have to look into that a little bit further. But the interesting thing for me is that Scott was able to adapt as soon as he got back to Earth, which makes sense because he only spent a year in this environment, and his body is, for his entire decades-long lifespan, was used to that anyway. So it wasn't much work to go back to what it was to be able to live on Earth.
Fantastic. And what do you think about replacing parts of our body with metal and so on? To overcome bone density issues? Like, could we get to a stage where if someone wants to go into space for long periods, or they want to move to Mars, we say that's great, but before you go, we're going to replace your lower body muscles, your bones with metal implants, or we're going to give you a knee replacement now because you might need one later, or those sorts of body modification things. What do you think?
That is absolutely fascinating, because it reminds me of when people go to Antarctica, or when they used to go to Antarctica, it was compulsory to get an appendicectomy because of the risk of getting appendicitis while in Antarctica and not having the resources to deal with that. So imagine going to work in Antarctica or wanting to go for the winter and being told that you had to undergo this mandatory surgical procedure where they take out a part of your body. Some people were compliant of that, they understood, but what some people may not realize, or what may not have been in the literature yet, was that the appendix is actually useful. It's not a vestigial part of the body as perhaps we once thought, but the appendix is a good reservoir of probiotics, good bacteria for the gut. And of course, anytime you operate on the body, you carry surgical risk, whether that's acutely or in the long term for the rest of your life. For example, just an example is that if you have abdominal surgery, you can develop adhesions, which is when this scar tissue causes quite bad pain and perhaps an obstruction later on. So it's not surgery and procedures, no matter how flash they are, will carry some risk regardless of where it is. In terms of replacing parts of the skeleton, that's very interesting. Young people don't tend to get these things, and the reason for that is because their bones are still undergoing metabolism, and there's still a process of calcium building versus calcium breaking. So we don't want young people and young, fit and healthy people to have to do this when they've got perfectly good working bones that are doing the thing that they should. If you replace it with metal, that metal is not going to do the same thing. So it cannot adapt to whatever you need to adapt to. And then you've got surgical risks as well. You could introduce bacteria, infections into the body by undergoing this procedure. If you wanted to undergo an MRI, it would be difficult because you would have metal in your body. So I think when you open a door, you close another one. It's not a win-win situation in most cases, but it's a very interesting point, and people may experiment with it in the future privately, or corporately to see what it does, and maybe I could be proven wrong, but to me, the less we interfere with the human body and its physiology, the better.
Well, let's get on to that right now. The less we interfere with the human body, the better. Now, as a doctor, do you still take a Hippocratic oath to do no harm? You do, really?
Yes, we do.
Excellent.
I will be doing that in November.
Oh, congratulations. That's so exciting. All I know about medicine, I learned from watching MASH on repeat growing up. So turns out not too bad. It's a little outdated. But let's talk about ethics then. I mean, arguably, sending someone to space is doing harm. And to an extent, a person can consent to some harm, but there is possibly an extent to which we say they cannot consent. In your view, and this is a big philosophical question, should we be sending people into space? And if so, what would be a good reason and what might not be, I suppose?
Sending people to space in general, it's the same reason that we built ships to explore the ocean, and the same reason that we built aircraft to travel the world. Humanity just gets to a point, and we're very lucky as Homo sapiens to have the brains that we do. We get to a point where perhaps you could argue that we have innate curiosity that makes us want to explore, but that's very, very esoteric, and it may not be biologically based. That's one argument into going to space, is because eventually, if you leave humanity long enough, it will do that anyway. The only reason that other species didn't is because either their brains weren't big enough or an asteroid hit them. So, which takes me to the next point, is that there is a non-zero chance of disasters happening that could wipe out some of our species, which sounds very, very, dramatic until you think about things like near-Earth objects and nuclear disasters even. It's not impossible that this would happen at some point. And so if we want to continue our species, then it's important that we have a subset of our species away from Earth, carrying on our legacy, and and ensuring that we continue. Then the question is, should we continue? If the asteroid hits us, then was it meant to be?
Well, yeah. It's an obvious question, right? The whole thing of like, oh, we need a backup of human civilization. Like, is the thing that is important about humans or valuable about humans our DNA? Is it our biology? Like, is it our brains? Or could we equally say that what's important about humans is our relationships, those things that are non-tangible, that would not be served by plonking a couple of humans cryogenically frozen in an ice bucket somewhere? Like, is it our relationships? Is it our art? Is it our history? Is it something that we can't really back up just by biology alone? What do you think?
That's really fascinating. What it means to be human is a big thing. The important thing is that perhaps 10,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, what those humans thought was right, and what those humans thought was what it means to be human, may not be what we think it means to be human. A long time ago, when Homo sapiens looked up at the stars, they probably didn't think, oh, we need to go there. They were probably more thinking about getting away from that lion, or building that pyramid, or conquering that land. That wasn't a priority. But we've done that now. We've explored a lot of the land on Earth, not the oceans, but the land. Where are we going to go now? What's our priority? And what is there to stop? What is there to stop revolutionaries and thinkers and inventors from exploring? It's just, if you could say, should we go to space or not? Yes or no. But an individual is going to do it anyway, and it's unethical to say that they can't do that. And if people want to follow that person, then they follow that person, and that's, I guess, yeah. It points to what it means to be an explorer, and what are we leaving behind? We maybe leave behind relationships, but what do we want to leave behind in terms of what we contribute to our children and our species?
Yeah, I think this is a really deep question, and I'll be honest with you, V. We've solved a lot over our many conversations over the years. I'm not sure we're going to solve this one in the next 5 minutes. But I think it's worth raising as a question, that question of what does it mean to be human? what does it mean to leave something behind? And yeah, and is it possible to get to a point where we acknowledge the possibilities of continuing to push outwards, but instead decide to turn inwards? Is that something that could happen? I think it's a really interesting question, and I think one that bridges, as we've said, that gap between things, the gap between medicine and space, but also philosophy and ethics and science and policy and all sorts of things. We've had a few comments come through. I've got to say, V, like normally when I have a conversation with you in a cafe, we don't have quite so many eavesdroppers putting comments in, but it actually really adds something. I might start suggesting people do this, maybe wear a t-shirt that says, feel free to make a comment. So I think just, speaking about all of these different areas, there's something to be explored. We've had a comment from Stephen in the chat that work needs to be done to understand the rights of humans as well. So if a human is in space, do they have a right to be supplied with food? Do they have a right to medical care? Do they have a right to return to Earth and have ongoing communications and all of those questions? I think that's a hugely ethical question as well, and a big one as well. We've also had the comment of basically saying, if we reduce the essence of humanity to DNA and then we just send DNA out into the universe to all of these different places and see what happens, that's probably the most, I think what Graziella is saying there is it's a very cost-efficient methodology. I'm not sure. I'd like you to, I suppose, give any thoughts you've got just to wrap up on what are your thinking on these topics, and just to say, like, we don't have to solve this today. I think this is something that we'll come back to in numerous space cafes in the future, and that I continue to dig into myself as someone who's deeply interested in these questions. But in terms of to rights to medical care and so on, from a medical perspective, from a doctor's perspective, how do you think about these issues? And then, I don't know, any thoughts for anybody who might want to look into space medicine as a potential career path or something to do research in themselves? I'll hand back to you, B.
Thank you, Annie. Well, I very much enjoy these eavesdroppers commenting. It's kind of like if we were physically sitting in a cafe, which you probably haven't done in a while, but when you sit down in a cafe, there's a table and you're like,
you do what, B?
And
and then what happens? Someone comes to you, right? And they ask you what you want and you tell them,
yep.
And it arrives. Wow.
And then you take your mask off and then you drink the beverage. So, but aside from that, there's people everywhere, and it's like Alice and Stephen and Malcolm and Naomi are coming and tapping us on the shoulder, being like, "Hey, what about this?" Like they've been overhearing our conversation, and I think that's wonderful because don't you love being interrupted by somebody who's actually engaged in what you're talking about? It's cool.
It's so cool.
It gives you a perspective that you never thought about. In terms of, I think the golden record is a very significant human achievement. It was sent on Voyager into deep space, and it's literally like a record-sized disc, and it's golden in color, and it contains data. I guess you could say data, or you could say art, information about what the people who created the golden record thought it means to be human. So I believe there is some Aboriginal language on the golden record. There are various symbols that were created to be able to be understood by other life forms. There are various sounds that one can hear on Earth, sounds of nature and sounds of people and so on. If that is what it means to be human, then I think we can take that to Mars. We could see Mars as an extension of Earth, because I think Earth will always be home. Earth will always be home, and perhaps Mars would just be a subset of that, or it would just happen to be an extension of home that is somewhere else. We'll always take our humanity with us and the history that precedes us. You and I are here because of history, and because events in history allowed us to have our freedoms and our technology. And I'm always very, very, very grateful for that. But that allows us then to propel ourselves forward, bringing that and having that as part of our human identity to wherever you choose to go, whether it's Mars or beyond. And Malcolm is saying that we shouldn't stop at Mars. The solar system is vast and full of possibilities. That's right. But really, like, when we go to Mars, how much of Mars are we going to make home? Like, when you move to a house, when you move houses, right, you bring all your stuff with you and then you furnish it, and then you put your own art up and you make it your own place, right? Are we just going to make Mars into another Earth, essentially? If we have our underground habitat, are we just going to make it look like things that we have on Earth? And if we don't, then how less of a human are we? There's a great question in the Space Discovery Center, in the ethics pillar, that says if we go to Mars and we genetically adapt so much that we become unrecognizable and we come back to Earth, then are we still humans or are we aliens? So lots of questions that are ethical and philosophical. And the beautiful thing is that we don't have to solve it today. In fact, nobody will solve it. It is by definition unsolvable. And this is the wonderful thing about ethics, is that there's no right or wrong. And every generation is going to have a different answer to these problems depending on the context in which they're living.
Absolutely. V, this has been a delight, a joy, and a privilege. Thank you so much for making time. I've really enjoyed catching up with you, and I really enjoyed having this conversation. It's created so many more questions than I would have ever thought possible. So, look, people can find me all over the internet, but if people want to get in contact or follow you, V, where should they do so?
You can follow me on Twitter at Vistronaut. That's Vistronaut, like astronaut with VI at the start. And you can follow me on LinkedIn at Vienna Tran.
Fantastic. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and hand back to Chiara to wrap everything up.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for this absolutely interesting discussion. I think I can speak for most people in the audience that have learned so much about what our bodies do in space, and also this discussion about ethics has been very insightful. I'd love to give a rundown for our next Space Café events that are coming up. So on the 14th of September at 4 p.m. CST, we have our 33 Minutes with Łukasz Wilczynski, who will talk more about the European Rover Challenge. And then on the 21st of September, so a week later at 4 p.m. CST, we have our 33 Minutes with Jean-Jacques Totora. Then on the 23rd of September at 9 a.m. CST, 9:30 a.m. CST, 5:30 p.m. For you. We have our Space Law Breakfast with Stephen Freeland, and Stephen has actually been quite busy in the chat and posting some comments, so it might be good for any further Space Law Breakfasts to also look at this question of ethics. So Stephen, I think the bar has been set quite high now. Also on this topic of ethics, we also have another Space Cafe series called Moriba's Vox Populi with Moriba Jah. So this is also very interesting to check out for an ongoing discussion on the ethics concerning humans in space. And then, very exciting news, on the 28th of September at 4 p.m. CST, we have 33 Minutes with ... live from Geneva. So we will keep you posted, so be on the lookout for that. As always, all our events are going to be online on Eventbrite. And we love to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We always want to hear your comments. Don't forget to sign up for our daily or biweekly newsletters if you haven't done so already. And if you want to treat yourselves to something special, become a Space Watcher today. Your support helps us greatly. So just take out your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.spacewatch.global. And I know we say this very often, but we do need your support to keep our work going for you. So thank you to everyone in the audience for showing your interest today. Thank you for being so busy in the chat and asking all your questions. A huge thank you to Annie and Vienna for this inspiring talk and for being our guests. And thanks again to the entire team behind the scenes for doing a great job week in and week out. So I hope that you all stay safe and stay healthy. And thank you for joining us today. I hope to see you in the next weeks at our next events. And in the meantime, don't forget to visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a space watcher. Thank you very, very much.